So Erica, you've been tremendously helpful to us at Sourcegraph. And I remember some meetings where we sat with you, we learned from you for 2 hours. We all walked out being so energized, and in particular about how you brought engineers closer to the business and customers, and how you brought the sales team closer to engineers. So we'd love to learn about how you built up that ability to do that so well. If you could just walk us through your history and learning to be good at that.
Yeah, and thanks for the kind words. Of course, I came out of that meeting thinking of all the things I didn't say or could have said better. So it's great to hear that it was useful for you folks. If I kind of go back in time, right? I was a startup founder, then I was at GitHub. In the early days of Bitnami, I think it really even goes back to a couple of our core values of the company. We had 5 core values, and one of them was ask why, and another one was like stay curious, right? And we would actually screen people at the time of hiring who really wanted to understand our business, who had curious minds, were not afraid to question like why things were the way they were. And that formed a really important, I think, foundation within the company that we were then able to build on in terms of understanding different parts of the business and sharing information. There are 2 concrete things that I would point to that I think really helped us out. One of them is, we would do these all hands every 2 weeks. And we made sure in the all hands to have different parts of the company presenting. And it wasn't always just product. Of course, everybody loves to see the product demos and hear from the engineers, but we would also have, BD or sales present and talk about recent customer wins or learnings or lost deals and what we learned from those. And we would even have like the finance team sometimes do a little segment on things that were changing about our processes or how we were making the way that we ran the business more efficient, or why we were changing a policy or something. And I think, elevating the different parts of the business and helping people build some empathy and some context for why things were the way they were made change management easier than it otherwise would have been. And, it's not usually that hard at a small company, but certainly as we grew and then as we got to GitHub scale, that becomes more and more important. And then one other concrete thing is when we would get the company together for, we called them on-sites, because even back then we had a distributed team. We would make sure that there was a lot of time in our on-site schedule for sessions on various parts of the business, right? And so every single function within the company would do a quick presentation on like, what were their OKRs? How did they, achieve or not achieve them? And most importantly, like, what were the lessons learned and what are they looking to change for the next, quarter or half to improve the way they operate and, hit that kind of next set of goals. And I think, sometimes some people are more interested in certain parts of the business than others. But really investing that time, again, I think builds a lot of empathy and context. And then we also would make sure we planned a lot of activities for people to just build relationships with each other outside of work. At our on-sites, we would have a soccer game. I would lead a walking tour around Sevilla that became a joke because I'm a terrible tour guide, but like to walk really fast. But I think, those types of things, and just helping people know who is working on what and who to reach out to help a lot. And, even when you kind of fast forward to GitHub, we at our all hands would always have a section where we had the sales team present, and we had like a win wires channel where we would talk about customer wins and learnings.
That's awesome.
And again, really try to highlight different parts of the company. We had support talk about the improvements they were making in support and how they were improving CSAT and how they were automating things. It takes a lot of deliberate action and time invested, but I think it pays dividends, in particular when you're running a remote and distributed team. Is there anything that folks are doing at Sourcegraph that you think has been working well on that front?
Well, we love having our own devs go and work with the devs at customers. Our customers are devs, so in a sense, you could say it's easier. But we're talking about dev tools companies here, and there are some devs who think, oh well, what are the rules that I need to follow? How do I need to behave? Do I need to speak in formal language? And once they realize it's just a dev on the other side, someone just like them, that just takes a whole barrier down. And people come back with these amazing stories about, oh, I didn't realize that this was so painful in the product, and I just got motivated to go and improve it. And it's so inspiring to me as CEO. And one thing we've gotten a lot better at is doing precisely that with with our new head of engineering. He's done an amazing job of this. And so for me as CEO and founder for the last 10 years, I look back to the previous time and wish that I had tried to instill that better. But you kind of got a chance to do that when you came into GitHub, having done that at Bitnami previously. So what did you feel like you needed to adjust in terms of engineers getting close to customers when you got to GitHub? What could be improved?
When it comes specifically to engineering and sales, which is always like I think a more challenging relationship, there's a few different aspects to it, right? One is the concept of sales, and like customers can kind of make engineers nervous if they're not used to having that kind of exposure. And to your point, once they start talking to people and realize, oh, wait, this is just a conversation where I'm trying to solve a problem for somebody and see if like what we're building will solve it. You see this like aha moment, and they're like, oh, wait, this isn't that bad. These people are, I'm in a position to help them. And if I listen to them, I can make the product better. Right. And I think just building that, that muscle, I think what changes from a smaller company to a company like GitHub is you just have to be a lot more programmatic in like building in the expectation that people do this work and having a way for people to engage. Like we pulled a lot of engineering folks into support at GitHub. In particular, when I first got there, our support team was really struggling for a wide variety of reasons that I won't get into, but like our CSAT was really low, and we just, the company and the business had grown so much, we weren't actually adequately staffed at the time, and just didn't have efficient enough processes to be able to support the customer base that we had that was growing so quickly. And if you look at a company like Bitnami, it was pretty easy. Like we used to rotate engineers through support. I'll come back to sales in a minute, but we used to rotate engineers through support because it built in that empathy and that understanding of what needed to be fixed in the product. And it actually resulted in a much better product. When you're GitHub scale and you have, 500-600 or more engineers, you need to build like really clear kind of channels and processes for bringing engineers into, whether it's, customer calls on the sales side or on the support side. And one thing we learned was how support needed to have a method for like identifying the cases that engineers could actually work on and help resolve, and like the product fixes that, that could happen quickly, basically, and surface up like a prioritized list of cases that we could then kind of hand to engineers. So we needed like a PM to go in, understand, the scope of the open tickets, understand what work needed to be done as a result, like kind of prioritize that and make it easier for the engineers who raise their hand. In the case of support, we asked for volunteers to actually engage. Support hadn't really built that out initially, and they just raised their hands like, hey, help, help, help. Then the engineers got there and didn't know what to do or how to help. So I think, at a small company, you can kind of get away with, a few Slack convos here and there, and like you can kind of understand what to do. At a bigger company, you need like kind of a program and a plan and a process for engaging people with the work. And then the same goes for sales, right? Like what engineers, like some people really just don't want to be in front of customers, full stop. And, some companies choose to be deliberate in their culture and that, no, you're all going to talk to customers. And that's the way we're building the company, which I think is great. not every company does that, and not every company can do it when you get to scale of, hundreds and hundreds of engineers. And so part of it was identifying like who is going to be energized by this and will be able to productively engage and wants to do that. And then also it's, how do you take the insights that you get from those phone calls and package them up in a way that can help actually inform the product roadmap, right? Again, at a startup, things happen a lot more organically, and it's only as you mature that you get a much like further out product roadmap and vision where you can like commit to things in advance in many cases. Of course, at GitHub scale, that becomes very important for your enterprise customers. And so you have to have this balance between, oh, I heard this on a sales call versus, hey, what's actually going to move the business and what are we going to implement? Because we can't do it all at once. And you need better processes in place for ingesting, organizing, and then prioritizing that information so it gets turned into actual, work to be done by the engineering.
Yeah. So when you found these engineer champions who wanted to go and be on the front lines, work with customers, the first ones that raised their hand to do that, what got them motivated? And, you could say a lot of engineers would say, well, I don't know how that's going to help me become a better engineer, but what is in it for engineers? What does it do to their career path? Anything beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak to everybody's individual motivations, but what I'll say is many times people get pulled in at first as somebody in sales or solutions architect or whatever is asking for a favor, right? Like, hey, pretty please, my friend who's in engineering, will you like come and hop on this phone call? And then they do it and they're like, holy cow, that was really cool, right? Once they start to see it, because I think, as an engineer in some companies, you can become somewhat separated from the customer if you're not careful and if the company is not deliberate about bringing these customer stories forward. And, I think for many people, it's very rewarding to see how the work you're doing is actually benefiting somebody, and not just in this kind of vague storytelling way, but no, I'm on the phone with a user whose life has been made better because of something that I am working on. Like, that's hugely motivating for most people. And you use the word energizing, which is a word I love. Like, it can be very energizing and motivating to hear these stories and see the impact of your work. And I think great engineers have curious minds, and a curious mind hopefully wants to understand the impact of not just what they're building, but like the decisions that they're making and how they build it, right? Like, hey, if I'm making this trade-off between speed and, some feature or something, like how would my user think about the trade-off that I'm making? Like, am I making the right trade-off? And the more you can empathize with the customer's experience and using the product and how it helps or hinders their work, like the better product you can build. So I think that's the motivation piece. On the career piece, I would say, understanding your customer and building that empathy will help you build a better product, full stop, which will generally help you in your career in general, right? I talked about making better decisions because you understand these things. I think that's true. I will also say, in every company that I've ever been in, you kind of, these people grow within the business over time that have exposure and understanding of the different parts of the business and have context on how they fit together. And those end up being the people that you tap for like the critically important projects, right? Something comes up and you're like, I'll give you an example from GitHub. We had to re-engineer our entire data systems and our billing architecture, right? For some changes we wanted to make to our pricing model, which was a beast of a job. This was going to be an over a year-long project, touch almost every aspect of the business, right? This was something we were running out of my kind of office. And
I bet customers cared a lot about that.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're doing a project like that, you go through the company and you're like, I'm looking for the very best people in each function that I can pull together into a tiger team that understand a little enough about the other parts of the business to help make good decisions for the better of all of GitHub in that case, right? As opposed to just being kind of myopically focused on their role as an engineer or their role as a, finance person. And so I think, investing your time as an engineer and understanding different parts of the business ends up surfacing opportunities to get involved in these really critical cross-company projects, which elevate your visibility with the executive team in a bigger company and really kind of pave the path to promotions and just more optionality in your career in the event that, you want to add something on to that engineering skill set. Maybe you want to go into product, maybe you want to go into solutions architecture, right? The more you understand about the business, the more options you have.
So if you're one of those engineers who does want to be tapped for the super important project and grow and learn in all these ways, but you feel like your current company is not giving you those opportunities, what would you recommend to that person to do? What could they reach out to their COO or CEO or whatever and say?
I mean, I'm highly biased to be having been that COO, but anytime somebody reached out to me and expressed an interest to work on a project that we had ongoing, and everything was public, so people could kind of see a lot of the work that was happening both out of my office and like across the entire company. And anytime somebody reached out, like I immediately had this like note in my brain for when things came up again. Now, of course, I was always looking for people that were already doing a great job in their current role. So I think that's important to understand. Sometimes people reach out, but they're not actually exceptional in their core role. Either you're in the wrong role in that case, or you should be more focused on just doing that job first before you start looking at other things. If you think you're in the wrong role, then talk to your manager, and you can also talk to an HR person. But usually a manager is a good start to help you think about, hey, like, what skills do you see? What am I great at? Like where might I apply these in the rest of the business?
So, make it so that if the CEO or COO reaches out to your manager, then they hear amazing things. They see this person is doing amazing, and it would be a huge loss to our team for them to help with this. That's what you wanted to hear, rather than, well, we've been looking for this person's role, because then, you'd be taking on the burden of managing this person essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. You want people who are stellar performers. And, something that I think is really underrated in business in general, engineering or otherwise, is do what you say you're going to do and like deliver on time. And if you can't, because sometimes engineering tasks in particular take longer than expected, be really proactive in communicating that, right? And let people know constantly, reset expectations if you have to. But I think, just delivering and communicating are underappreciated skills that will also help you earn opportunities like the ones that we're talking about in cross-company projects, because executives notice when people deliver and like keep you posted on what's going on and help make sure that everybody has the information they need at the time that they need it. So that's a great way to stand out. And if you couple that with raising your hand and saying, hey, I've heard this project is going on, or I've seen this issue in the business and I have an idea of how to solve it. That happened a good amount at GitHub. People, in fact, that's how we formed our corporate security team. I was talking with one of the guys who ran our cert function, and he mentioned a few things that like he thought we were underinvested in. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. Can you like write up a one-pager? And it was illuminating for me, a bunch of things I didn't know. I was fairly new in the business at the time. And we like funded an entirely new team and department and ran a bunch of work that he ended up spearheading because he took the initiative to do that. And he was a stellar performer in his existing role, who was a great communicator and everything else. So that opened.
That's awesome.
I mean, now he's the strategic advisor to the CISO at GitHub. So it opened up like an amazing, several steps in his career path as a result of his doing that. It's an awesome story.
Yeah, that's great. One other source of tension between sales and marketing on one side and engineers on the other is when it comes to what to make free or put in open source or do for the open source community, or to not annoy devs. versus, how do we make money on a feature? What kind of principles or tactics did you use to make the right decision there?
Yeah. I mean, GitHub's model, especially the initial model, was great, right? And if you have an angle like that, it's fabulous, which is like everything that's public is free. If you want to keep anything private, you pay for it. It's a very clear line. It's very easy to understand. I think not all businesses have that opportunity, but anytime that you have an opportunity to make something very clear, like, here's a line, it's very simple, one side free, one side not, is great. I think in reality, for most businesses, that clear line is not there. And so there are, I think, a pretty standard set of things and features that are really more appropriate for enterprise. And, the things we look at are, number one, scale, right? If you're running an infrastructure company, like, yeah, maybe you have a free tier, but it should really just be meant for prototyping. As soon as somebody wants to put something in production, it's fair to charge them for it. So that's always kind of a line that we have in mind. I think, if you look at tools or products like Sourcegraph, it's like, hey, look, when do you go from like an individual user getting value out of something to a team? That's another really good dividing line. And whether it's just, going from one team to many, for each business, I think that can be a little different, right? You want to have like a good product-led growth motion where you can get a little bit of early momentum around product adoption within an org. But as soon as you need any kind of like management controls, role-based access control is, huge and something that really only an enterprise needs. So you're usually fine to charge for that. Features like audit, like, controls, extra logging, things that people need for compliance, are also a very clear, I think, dividing line between free and paid.
The GitHub way with a single dividing line sounds a lot simpler. So I think the advice is, if you can find that simple dividing line, adopt that, right?
Yeah, if you can find that line, adopt it. If not, look at scale and compliance, like scale / production use, compliance, and management tools. Those are the buckets.
Yeah. And then final question, one that's very near and dear to the hearts of every DevTools company, where our users are developers. Do you think that the massive advances in LLMs recently will 10 years from now mean there's more people writing code or less people writing code?
It's a great question. And I wish I had a crystal ball. What I will say is, I don't know if there's been a time, certainly in my lifetime, where we've seen such rapid like technological advancement and such a massive sea change, right? And just the way that the world works and the way that we're going to interact with almost every aspect of technology in our lives is going to change. And I don't think it's going to take 10 years. I think it's, this is more of a 3 to 5 year thing. I mean, the pace is mind blowing. Even when we launched Copilot at GitHub, like, it was better than we expected. How often is it that you launch a product and it delivers with like better quality than you expect?
It always happens to me, of course. But
always at Sourcegraph. Sourcegraph is very special. I think the job of developers is going to change materially. I think it's going to be much more about how do we create new ways of doing things. It's going to be much more of the creative outputs as opposed to, kind of rewriting the same or similar code. Like, I think a lot of the tedious work is going to go away very quickly. And I think that's a great thing for developers. We already saw people doing this in manual ways with Stack Overflow or searching GitHub for open source or something. And now I think that's very automated. And I think, things like testing and code reviews are very quickly going to get much more automated, much like it's going to be AI generated for the most part. But I think there will still be a role for developers in how do we build the new ways of doing things? And then how do we think about, the user experience of interacting with something, and how do we craft something that's new and better and different? So, my son's 10, he's learning Python, he's loving coding. I think it's still a worthy pursuit, and certainly will be. The way devs spend their time will change, but the need for an engineering mindset and a builder mindset is not going to go away.
Yeah. And one that understands who they're building for and the customers.
Exactly. Yeah. Way to wrap it up on that note.
Well, thank you very much, Erica. And thank you for all the amazing things that you built, and also for being a supporter of Sourcegraph now that you're at Redpoint.
Very grateful for the opportunity to work with you folks. Thanks so much for this.
Thanks.